Imagine 200 people laughing at you at a lavish retirement party because your own father just called you a worthless failure. That was my reality until I stood up and raised my glass. They thought I was a leech, but they had no idea I secretly owned the company keeping their entire business alive. When the truth came out, the laughter stopped cold. Now they are not begging for family. They are begging to renew a multi-million-dollar contract. My name is Quinn Howard, and if you looked at the seating chart for the retirement gala at the Hawthorne Ridge Club in Westport, Connecticut, you would find my name assigned to Table 19. Table 19 was not a seat of honor. It was the table closest to the swinging double doors of the kitchen, where the scent of roasted duck was constantly overpowered by the smell of industrial dishwasher detergent and the frantic whispers of the catering staff. That was fitting, I suppose. In the grand, meticulously curated architecture of my father's life, I was little more than a structural error he had been trying to plaster over for 3 decades. The room was a cavern of old money and aggressive prestige. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a fractured, glittering light over the crowd. 200 people sat before me, a sea of black tuxedos and evening gowns that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. These were the titans of industry, the country club royalty, the people who believed that net worth was a moral character trait, and standing on the raised stage, bathed in a golden spotlight that seemed to love him as much as he loved himself, was Gordon Howard. My father? He looked every inch the king of medical logistics he claimed to be. At 65, he still had a full head of silver hair and a jawline that suggested he had never lost an argument in his life. He was gripping the podium with both hands, leaning forward as if he were about to bestow the 10 Commandments upon us, rather than just announce his transition from CEO to chairman of Howard Med Transit. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, watching him. I was 34 years old. I was wearing a navy blue dress that was simple, elegant, and completely invisible in a room full of sequins and diamonds. That was the point. I had spent half my life trying to be invisible to these people. Gordon was nearing the end of his speech. He had already spent 20 minutes extolling the virtues of American enterprise, the grit it took to build an empire from nothing, and the importance of legacy. Now, he was moving on to the personal portion of the evening, the part where he displayed his family like prized livestock at a county fair. And of course, Gordon boomed, his voice amplified by a sound system that cost $50,000. A man is nothing without the support of his family. My rock, my partner, Diane, he gestured to the table at the very front. Diane stood up. My stepmother was a vision in emerald green silk. Her smile practiced and perfect, she waved to the room, radiating the kind of warmth that chilled you to the bone if you got too close. The applause was polite and enthusiastic. And my son, Ethan, Gordon continued, his voice swelling with genuine pride. The future of Howard Med Transit, a young man with the vision to take us into the next century. Ethan stood up next to his mother. At 31, he was a softer, less impressive copy of our father. He had the same expensive suit, but his eyes were shifty, always scanning the room to see who was watching him. He buttoned his jacket, nodded to the applause, and looked every bit the heir apparent. I took a sip of water. I knew what was coming. I had debated not coming tonight. I had debated staying in my quiet apartment, ordering takeout, and working on the quarterly projections for my own company, but something in me, some old, masochistic instinct, had needed to see this. I needed to see him one last time before the hammer fell. And finally, Gordon said, his tone shifting, the warmth evaporated from his voice. It was subtle, but to me, it sounded like a door slamming shut. He looked out into the darkness of the room, scanning the back tables until his eyes found me. He didn't smile, or rather, he did smile, but it was a smile meant for the audience, a pitying, tight-lipped expression that signaled to everyone that he was about to be magnanimous about a disappointment. "My daughter, Quinn," he said. He didn't ask me to stand. He didn't gesture for applause. He just let my name hang there for a second. heavy and awkward. "We all have different paths," Gordon said, chuckling softly into the microphone. The room quieted down, sensing the shift. Ethan took the path of leadership, and well, Quinn has always marched to the beat of a very different, much slower drum. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. I felt the heat rise up the back of my neck, but I did not move. "She is still finding herself," Gordon continued, leaning casually against the podium. 34 years old, and she is still figuring out what she wants to be when she grows up. No degrees to speak of, no career path. But hey, every family needs a free spirit, right? Even if that spirit is mostly just expensive to maintain. The laughter was louder now. It wasn't friendly. It was jagged. It was the sound of 200 people who were relieved that they weren't the ones being targeted. It was the laughter of exclusion. "In all seriousness," Gordon said, wiping a fake tear from his eye, "we love her. Even if she is uneducated and worthless in the boardroom, she is still a Howard. And we Howards take care of our own, no matter how much of a burden they are." He raised his glass. "To family, the strong ones who carry the weak." The room erupted. Men slapped their knees. Women covered their mouths with manicured hands to hide their giggles. They were laughing at me. They were laughing at the caricature my father had painted the leech. The dropout, the failure who lived off daddy's money. They looked at me, expecting to see shame. They expected to see me shrink into my chair, eyes downcast, accepting the narrative that had been forced on me since I was a teenager. They expected the Quinn who used to cry in her bedroom. But that Quinn was gone. I sat there, and I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. It was like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air pressure drops and the birds stop singing. I looked at Gordon on that stage, beaming with his cruelty, so confident in his power. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was nothing more than a prop in his story of benevolence. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor. A harsh sound that cut through the dying laughter at the nearby tables. I stood up. I picked up my champagne flute. The crystal felt cool and solid in my hand. I didn't look at the floor. I didn't look at the exit. I looked straight at the stage. The people at table 19 went quiet, then table 18. The silence spread like a contagion, rippling outward from the back of the room until it reached the front. The laughter died down, replaced by a confused murmur. Gordon squinted against the spotlight, trying to see what was happening. I raised my glass high. My hand was steady, rock steady. "Cheers," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden silence of the ballroom, it carried, "Enjoy your night, everyone. This is the last time you will ever see me." I didn't drink. I tilted the glass and poured the expensive champagne onto the floor. It splashed against the polished wood, a small golden puddle of waste. Then I set the empty glass down on the table with a deliberate click. I turned around and walked away. I could feel 400 eyes boring into my back. My heels struck the floor with a rhythmic, decisive cadence. Click, click, click. It sounded like a judge's gavel banging down, over and over again. I didn't rush. I didn't hunch my shoulders. I walked with the spine my grandmother had told me was made of steel. I pushed through the double doors, leaving the scent of roasted duck and humiliation behind me. The hallway outside was cool and empty. I walked past the coat check, ignoring the startled look of the attendant, and pushed out into the night air. The Connecticut autumn was biting, the wind whipping through the thin fabric of my dress. But I didn't feel the cold. I felt a burning, white-hot clarity. "Quinn." The voice came from behind me just as I reached the valet stand. I didn't stop. I kept walking toward the self-park lot where I had left my car. I wasn't going to wait for a valet to bring around my 6-year-old sedan while my family gawked. "Quinn, you stop right there." A hand clamped around my upper arm, sharp nails digging into my skin. I spun around, ripping my arm free with enough force that Diane stumbled back a step in her high heels. She looked deranged. Her perfect hair was slightly windswept, and her face was twisted into a mask of furious panic. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the valets wouldn't hear. "You caused a scene. You walked out on your father's tribute. Get your ass back in there and apologize immediately." I looked at her, really looked at her. For years, her sharp words had cut me. For years, I had craved her approval, or at least her mercy. Now, looking at her shivering in her emerald silk, she just looked small. "I didn't cause a scene, Diane," I said calmly. "I finished one." "You are an ungrateful little brat," she spat. "After everything Gordon has done for you, after he publicly acknowledged you." "Acknowledged me?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Is that what you call that?" "He humiliated me to make himself look big. He needed a prop, and I'm done playing the part." "You will go back in there," she threatened, pointing a finger at my face. "You will go back in there. You will smile, and you will act like a grateful daughter. Or so help me God." "Or what?" the voice boomed from the club entrance. Gordon was marching toward us, his face a mottled red under the parking lot floodlights. Ethan was trailing behind him, looking like a lost puppy who wasn't sure if he should bark or hide. Gordon stopped 3 feet from me. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving beneath his tuxedo shirt. "You embarrass me," Gordon growled. "On my night, you walk out on me." "I'm leaving. Gordon," I said. I didn't call him Dad. I hadn't called him Dad in my head for a long time. But saying his name out loud felt like severing the last thread. "If you get in that car," Gordon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble, "you are done. Do you hear me? I will cut you off completely. No allowance, no inheritance, no safety net. You will be on the street. Quinn, you have no skills, no job, and no husband to take care of you. You will have nothing." He waited for the fear. He waited for me to crumble, to apologize, to beg for the meager scraps of financial support he claimed to provide. I looked at him, and I felt a smile touch my lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who knows the punchline to a joke that everyone else has missed. "You threaten me with money?" I asked softly. "It is the only language you understand." "You leech," Ethan chimed in from behind Gordon, finding his courage now that his father was controlling the situation. I ignored Ethan. I kept my eyes locked on Gordon. "You talk about cutting me off," I said, "but you are forgetting something. Gordon, you cut me off 14 years ago." Gordon blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about? We send you checks." "You stopped paying for my life the day you pulled me out of college to fund Ethan's frat parties," I said. "Those checks you send, I haven't cashed a single one in a decade. Check your bank statements. Old man, you have been paying for a ghost." "That is a lie," Diane scoffed. "How would you survive? You live in a dump." "I live where I choose to live," I said. "And as for inheritance, keep it. I don't want a penny of your money. I never have." "You are bluffing," Gordon sneered. "You are trying to save face. Go ahead. Drive away. See how far you get without the Howard name to open doors for you." "I have already gone further than you know," I said. "And I did it without your name. In fact, I did it in spite of it." I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and also the easiest. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. But my hands were steady as I fished my keys out of my clutch. "If you leave," Gordon shouted, his voice cracking, "don't you dare come back crawling when you starve. You are dead to us. Quinn, you hear me? Dead." I opened the car door. "I heard you the first time, 14 years ago," I said over my shoulder. "Just remember, Gordon, you told the world I was worthless. Make sure you don't regret that when the bill comes due." I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The heavy thud shut out their voices. I could see them through the window, Gordon waving his arms, Diane looking like she was about to scream, Ethan checking his phone. They looked like a silent movie of a family falling apart. I started the engine. My car was a reliable sedan, dark gray, anonymous, just like me. I put it in gear and pulled out of the parking space, driving right past them without looking back. I merged onto the main road, the darkness of the Connecticut countryside swallowing the club's lights in my rearview mirror. The silence in the car was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. It felt clean. My phone, mounted on the dashboard, buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification. It wasn't a text from a friend asking how the party went. It wasn't a pity message from a relative. It was a message from Jonah Pierce, my chief financial officer at Northbridge Optimization Group. I glanced at the preview text glowing in the dark cab. Jonah. We just got the alert from the system. The master service agreement with Howard Med Transit is up for renewal in 30 days. Their procurement team is asking for a rush extension. They are desperate. Do we sign? I stared at the road ahead, the white lines flashing by like strobe lights. A laugh bubbled up in my chest, real and deep. Gordon thought he had just cut off a dead limb. He had no idea he had just severed the main artery of his own empire. No, I whispered to the empty car. We don't sign. Not yet. I reached out and tapped the screen, clearing the notification. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in my life. I knew exactly where I was going. The silence in my car was nothing new. I had been living in a vacuum of silence for 14 years. As the highway markers flashed by in the rhythm of a metronome, my mind did not stay on the road ahead. It drifted back, inevitably, to the house on Sycamore Lane, to the outside world. The Howard residence was the definition of American success. It was a sprawling colonial estate with white pillars that gleamed in the sunlight and a lawn so manicured it looked like green velvet. We were the family on the Christmas card that everyone envied. Gordon Howard, the benevolent provider; Diane, the devoted wife; Ethan and Quinn, the fortunate children. But photographs are static. They do not capture the temperature of a room. If you could have walked through the front door on any given Tuesday evening, the chill would have hit you harder than a winter draft. My mother died when I was very young, leaving behind a silence that Gordon filled not with love, but with a new wife. Diane arrived when I was 7, bringing with her a wardrobe of pastel suits and a son, Ethan, who was 3 years older than me. They fit into the house as if they had been measured for it. I, on the other hand, became an obstruction. There was never any violence. I want to be clear about that. Gordon never raised a hand to me. Diane never locked me in a closet. To the neighbors and the school board, we were immaculate. The abuse was far more subtle, and because of that, it was far more effective. It was the abuse of erasure. I became what I eventually called breathing furniture. I would come home from school with an A on a history paper, bursting to share it at the dinner table. But dinner was a production starring Ethan. Ethan made the varsity soccer team. Ethan had a funny story about the math teacher. Ethan needed new cleats. Diane would listen to him with a rapturous gaze. And Gordon would nod, carving the roast with the precision of a surgeon, asking follow-up questions. I would sit there, waiting for a pause, a breath, a gap in the conversation where I could insert my existence. The gap never came. If I tried to speak, Gordon would look at me with a mild irritation, as if a lamp had suddenly started talking. Not now, Quinn, he would say. Ethan is speaking. So I learned to stop speaking. The disparity was not just emotional, it was financial, and it was blatant. When Ethan turned 16, a brand new sports car appeared in the driveway with a red bow on the hood. Gordon clapped him on the shoulder, talking about responsibility and manhood. When I turned 16, I was handed a bus schedule and told that learning public transit builds character. When Ethan needed a tutor because he was failing algebra, Gordon hired a professor from the local university at $100 an hour. When I asked for money to buy advanced textbooks for my self-study, Diane sighed and looked at Gordon with a pained expression. "Gordon, honey," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "Is it really necessary? Girls do not need that much theory. She should focus on home economics or something practical." "You are right," Gordon replied, not even looking at me. "No need to waste resources." I learned early on that in the Howard economy, Ethan was an investment. and I was an expense, an unnecessary overhead cost that they were trying to minimize. The only person who saw me, who really saw me, was my grandmother, Rose Howard. Rose lived in a retirement community in Florida, exiled there by Gordon years ago because she was too opinionated for his liking. But every Sunday at 4 o'clock sharp, the landline in the kitchen would ring. Diane hated those calls. She would hand me the receiver with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "It is the matriarch," Diane would sneer. I would take the phone to the pantry, sitting on a crate of bottled water, and for 10 minutes, I existed. "Tell me what you saw this week." "Quinn?" Rose would say. Her voice was raspy, smelling of smoke even over the phone line. "Not what they told you to see. What did you actually see?" I would tell her about Gordon's meetings, the way he shifted his weight when he was lying, the way Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes when she talked to the neighbors. "Good," Rose would say. "You are learning. Listen to me. Quinn, the loud ones are the weak ones. They make noise to distract you from what they lack. You are quiet. That makes you dangerous. Learn everything. Watch the money. Watch the contracts. One day, that silence will be your weapon." I clung to those words. I studied harder than anyone knew. I didn't do it for praise, because I knew none was coming. I did it for escape. I kept my grades perfect. I padded my resume with extracurriculars that didn't cost money. I built a transcript that was bulletproof. By the time I was 20, I was a sophomore at a prestigious university, having secured a partial scholarship that covered half my tuition. The other half, Gordon paid. He complained about it every month, calling it charity, but he paid it because having a daughter at a top-tier university looked good for the family brand. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. I was home for the weekend. The atmosphere in the house was tense. Ethan had just graduated from a mediocre college with mediocre grades, and he was drifting. He wanted to go to Europe. He wanted to do a prestigious, unaccredited leadership program in Switzerland that cost a fortune. Gordon called a family meeting in his study. The room smelled of leather and expensive cigars. Gordon sat behind his massive mahogany desk. Diane sat in the armchair next to him, holding Ethan's hand. I was left standing. "We have to make some adjustments," Gordon began, his voice grave. He opened a ledger on his desk, pretending to study figures I knew he had made up. "The market is tough right now. Howard Med Transit is facing some liquidity issues." I knew this was a lie. I read the financial news. The logistics sector was booming, but I said nothing. "We have to tighten our belts," Gordon continued. He looked up at me. "Quinn, I am afraid we can no longer support your education." The air left the room. "What?" I whispered. "The tuition is too high," Gordon said, closing the ledger with a final thump. "And frankly, we are not seeing the return on investment. You are studying literature and economics. It is indulgent." "I have a 4.0 GPA, I said, my voice shaking. "I am on the dean's list. I have a scholarship that covers half. And the other half is $50,000 a year we do not have," Diane interjected smoothly. "Not when Ethan has such a critical opportunity ahead of him." I looked at Ethan. He was smirking, looking at his fingernails. "Ethan," I asked, "what opportunity?" "The Zurich Leadership Initiative," Gordon said, beaming. "It is a vital step for his future role in the company. The networking alone is worth the price of admission, but it is expensive. Quinn, very expensive. We have to prioritize." "So I have to drop out," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "So Ethan can go on a ski vacation in Switzerland. It is an educational program." Ethan snapped. "It is a glorified holiday for rich kids who can't get jobs," I shouted. It was the first time I had raised my voice in that house in years. Gordon slammed his hand on the desk. "Enough. The decision is made. You will withdraw next week. You can come home, maybe take some courses at the community college, or find a husband. I don't care, but the checkbook is closed." I stood there, trembling. I felt tears pricking my eyes. but I remembered Rose's voice. "Don't let them see you cry." "You promised," I said, my voice low. "When Mom died, you promised her you would ensure my education. You swore it." Gordon looked at me. His face was a mask of cold indifference. It was the face of a man looking at a bad investment. "Circumstances change, Quinn," he said. "Your mother is dead, I am alive, and I am telling you that the money is going to the son who will actually carry this family's legacy, not the daughter who will just change her name and leave." He waved his hand, a dismissive gesture. Meeting adjourned. I didn't storm out. I didn't beg. I didn't fall to my knees. A cold, hard stone formed in my stomach. It replaced the fear. It replaced the sadness. I turned around and walked out of the study. I walked up the stairs to my room. It was not my room anymore. It was just a holding cell I was about to vacate. I took one suitcase. I packed my clothes. I packed the photo of my mother. I packed the few books I had bought with my own money. I left the jewelry Diane had given me for appearances. I left the laptop Gordon had bought. I had $3,000 in a savings account I had hidden from them, money earned from doing other students' term papers. I walked down the stairs. It was 2 a.m. The house was silent. I stood in the foyer, looking at the family portrait hanging above the mantelpiece. Gordon, Diane, and Ethan were seated, smiling. I was standing behind them, slightly out of focus. I opened the front door. The night air was cool. I made a vow then. Standing on the threshold of the life I was leaving behind, I vowed that I would never again allow another human being to determine my worth. I vowed that I would never again ask for permission to exist. Gordon had kept his money. He had kept his son. But he had lost the only thing in that house that had any real value. Though he was too blind to see it, I closed the door behind me. I did not slam it. I simply clicked it shut. I walked down the driveway, the wheels of my suitcase humming against the pavement. I did not look back. That was 14 years ago. And until tonight at the retirement party, I had never been in the same room with them since. They thought they had broken me that night. They thought they had discarded me. They did not know that they had simply set me free. New Haven was not a soft landing. It was gritty, loud, and smelled perpetually of diesel fumes and damp pavement. I rented a studio apartment above a 24-hour laundromat on the edge of the city. The rent was $650 a month, which was exactly half of what I could earn if I worked double shifts. The floor vibrated every time the industrial dryers downstairs hit their spin cycle, a rhythmic thrumming that became the soundtrack to my new life. I slept on a mattress I had dragged in from the curb and sanitized with 3 bottles of bleach. My dinner was usually instant noodles or day-old bread from the bakery where I worked the morning shift. But for the first time in my life, I slept soundly. There were no expectations here. No heavy silences at the dinner table. No disappointed glances. I was poor. I was tired. But I was sovereign. I knew I could not wait tables forever. I needed to get inside the machine of commerce. I applied for 40 jobs in 2 weeks. Most rejected me because I had no degree. Finally, a small logistics firm called Iron Leaf Systems called me back. They were looking for an administrative assistant. The pay was $12 an hour. I took it. Iron Leaf was a chaotic, dusty operation run out of a converted warehouse. They moved auto parts and industrial piping. My job was supposed to be answering phones and filing invoices, but I have never been able to look at a mess and not want to fix it. I noticed the patterns within 3 weeks. The drivers were taking inefficient routes to avoid tolls, but burning 30% more fuel. The warehouse was storing heavy inventory in the back, adding 10 minutes to every loading time. The contracts with suppliers had not been renegotiated in 5 years. I started staying late. Not for overtime pay, because they would not give it to me. But for the data, I pulled the shipping manifests from the trash. I built spreadsheets on an ancient desktop computer in the back corner. I mapped out the routes. I ran the numbers. The owner of Iron Leaf was a man named Wade Hallstrom. He was 60 years old, had a face like crumpled leather, and smoked cigars inside the building despite the fire code. He was terrifying to most of the staff. He yelled when shipments were late and threw staplers when the phone lines went down. One evening, 6 months into the job, Wade found me in the break room at 8 o'clock at night. I had a map of the tri-state area spread out on the table, covered in red marker. "What are you doing?" "Howard," he barked, chewing on an unlit cigar. "You are not paid to play with maps. Your drivers are losing you $4,000 a month on the I-95 corridor," I said, not looking up. "They are avoiding the way station near Bridgeport, which adds 40 miles to the round trip, if you pay the overload permit fee up front, which is only $200, you save $3,800 in fuel and labor." Wade stopped. He walked over to the table and looked at my red lines. He looked at my spreadsheet. He looked at me. "Who taught you to calculate fuel surcharges?" he asked. "I read the Federal Motor Carrier Handbook last weekend," I replied. Wade grunted. He didn't praise me. He didn't smile. He just pointed a thick finger at the map. "Fix it. If you are wrong, I fire you." I was not wrong. The next month, Ironleaf saved nearly $5,000. That was the beginning. Wade Hallstrom became my mentor, though he would never use that word. He was brutal. He threw problems at me that grown men with master's degrees avoided. He made me negotiate with angry union reps. He made me audit the inventory in freezing cold warehouses. He taught me that business was not about suits and handshakes. It was about leverage and margins. "School teaches you how the world should work," Wade told me once, after I had successfully argued down a vendor who was trying to price gouge us on tires. "This place teaches you how it actually works. You have a brain. Quinn, use it. Don't let anyone tell you that you need a piece of paper to be smart." I took his advice to heart. My education became my obsession. I did not have the money for a university, so I built my own. I spent my nights scouring the internet. I took free courses on Coursera and edX until my eyes burned. I read textbooks on supply chain optimization, forensic accounting, and corporate law. I learned R and Python so I could code my own data models. I treated every Friday night like a final exam, while people my age were at bars. I was running simulations on cold chain logistics failures. 3 years later, I knew I had outgrown Ironleaf. I had a vision for something tighter, sharper, and far more lucrative. I saw a gap in the market. General logistics was a race to the bottom on price, but specialized logistics, the movement of sensitive medical devices, live tissue, pharmaceuticals that required strict temperature controls, that was a high-stakes game. In that world, a delay didn't just cost money, it cost lives, and because the stakes were high, the margins were massive. I launched Northbridge Optimization Group from my kitchen table. I had one rule: absolute anonymity. I knew the name Howard carried weight in the industry because of my father, but I also knew that if Gordon found out I was competing in his orbit, he would use his influence to crush me before I took my first breath. I hired a lawyer to file the incorporation papers using a blind trust. My name did not appear on the public registry. I needed a face for the company, someone who could walk into boardrooms and shake hands while I pulled the strings from the dark. I found Jonah Pierce. Jonah was a former Wall Street CFO who had been blacklisted for blowing the whistle on his previous firm's embezzlement. He was brilliant, he was ethical, and he was desperate for a second chance. I met him in a diner in Hartford. I was 27, he was 50. "I run the strategy," I told him, sliding a business plan across the sticky table. "I build the algorithms, I optimize the routes. You handle the clients, you sign the contracts, and you never, ever tell anyone who really owns Northbridge." Jonah read the plan. He looked at the financial projections. He looked at me. "This is aggressive," he said. "It is necessary," I said. "Are you in?" He was in. Northbridge Optimization Group started slow. We took the jobs the big giants didn't want. We moved experimental vaccines for small biotech startups. We coordinated the transport of delicate MRI machines for rural hospitals. We didn't just move things. We optimized the entire flow. We cut waste. We predicted delays before they happened. We were ghosts in the system, making everything run smoother, faster, cheaper by the third year. We had moved out of my kitchen and into a sleek, nondescript office park. We had a staff of 12 analysts and operators. Our revenue hit $2 million, then 4, then 10. We became the secret weapon for companies that could not afford to fail. We were expensive, and we were worth it. Then came the irony that felt like a cosmic joke. Our reputation for saving distressed supply chains had spread. One morning, Jonah walked into my office, a room with no nameplate on the door, and dropped a request for proposal on my desk. "You are not going to believe who just called," Jonah said. I looked at the cover sheet. Howard Med Transit, my father's company. They were in trouble. The document outlined a massive inefficiency in their Northeast distribution network. They were losing contracts because they couldn't guarantee delivery windows for their new line of surgical kits. They needed an external audit and a complete overhaul of their routing logic. My hands shook slightly as I picked up the paper. It was signed by Ethan Howard, Vice President of Operations. Of course, Ethan had been promoted, and naturally, he had broken the system. "Do we bid?" Jonah asked, watching me closely. He knew who they were. He knew the history. I looked at the numbers. It was a massive contract. It would double our revenue overnight. But more than that, it was poetic justice served on a silver platter. They were drowning, and the only person who could save them was the daughter they had thrown overboard. "We bid," I said, "and we charged them a 20% premium for the rush." We won the contract. They didn't even blink at the price. They were desperate. For 2 years. Northbridge Optimization Group ran the nervous system of Howard Med Transit. I saw their internal data. I saw their weaknesses. I fixed their messes. I wrote the protocols that Ethan took credit for in his quarterly reports. Every dollar of profit they made in the Northeast Corridor passed through a system I designed. And they had no idea. The peak of this absurdity happened 6 months ago. I attended a logistics innovation conference in Boston. I wore a black wig and heavy-rimmed glasses. I sat in the back row of the auditorium. Gordon was on the panel discussing the future of medical supply chains. He looked older, but his arrogance was untouched by time. "Efficiency is not just about speed," Gordon pontificated to the crowd of 500 industry leaders. "It is about partnership. At Howard Med Transit, we believe in finding the best talent. We recently partnered with a boutique firm, Northbridge Optimization, absolute geniuses. They overhauled our entire grid. I personally oversaw the selection." He hadn't. He had barely read the contract. "It takes a visionary to recognize talent," Gordon continued, soaking up the nodding heads in the audience. "That is what I have always done. I spot potential, and I nurture it." I sat there in the dark, my notebook open on my lap. I was the talent he was bragging about. I was the genius he was claiming to have discovered. The man who had told 200 people I was uneducated and worthless was now standing on a stage, taking credit for my mind. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to stand up right there and scream the truth. But I stayed seated. I let him have his applause, because I knew something he didn't. I knew that the renewal date for the Northbridge contract was approaching. I knew that without my algorithms, his efficiency would collapse in 6 weeks. And I knew that very soon, the power dynamic was going to shift so violently that it would leave him gasping for air. I closed my notebook and slipped out of the auditorium before the lights came up. I had work to do, and Gordon Howard had a retirement party to plan. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks before the event. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope that felt more like a slab of marble than paper. My name was calligraphed in gold leaf on the front. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. It was a royal decree issued from the throne of Howard Med Transit, commanding the presence of the family disappointment so she could be properly displayed as a cautionary tale. I held the card in my hand, tracing the embossed lettering of my father's name. A younger version of me would have thrown it in the trash. A younger version of me would have cried. But the woman who built Northbridge Optimization Group did not cry over stationery. I placed the card on my desk. Right next to the termination contract I had already drafted. I was going. Not to make peace, not to beg for a place at the table. I was going because a trap needs bait, and I was willing to walk into the cage to make sure the door locked behind them. Not me. The night of the party. I drove my sedan up the winding driveway of the Hawthorne Ridge Club. The valet looked at my car with a sneer that suggested I had taken a wrong turn on the way to the service entrance. I ignored him, handing over the keys with a crisp $5 bill. Diane was waiting just inside the double mahogany doors. She was the gatekeeper of the Howard image, her eyes scanning every guest for flaws she could exploit later in conversation. When she saw me, her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened into flint. "Quinn," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She stepped forward, blocking my path to the ballroom. Her hand fluttered out and touched the fabric of my navy dress. "Oh, honey, is this off the rack?" "It is vintage, Diane," I said, keeping my voice level. "It looks tired," she whispered, leaning in close so the guests behind me wouldn't hear. "Try to stand in the back, will you? We have senators here tonight. Gordon doesn't need people asking why his daughter looks like she shops at a discount bin. I will stay out of the way," I promised. "I wouldn't want to ruin the aesthetic." She patted my cheek, a gesture that was patronizing enough to make my skin crawl. "Good girl. At least you know your place." I walked past her, my heels silent on the plush carpet. My place? I found my assigned seat. Table 19. As I had noted before, it was the worst table in the room. It was shoved into the far corner, right next to the swinging door that led to the kitchen. Every time a waiter burst through with a tray of filet mignon, a gust of steam and the clatter of silverware washed over me. It was a deliberate geography of exclusion. Gordon had put his business partners at the front, his golf buddies in the middle, and his failure of a daughter next to the dirty dishes. I sat down. I did not check my phone. I did not look around nervously. I sat with the stillness of a statue. That was when the relatives descended. They came in waves, like vultures circling a carcass. These were aunts and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, people whose entire understanding of my life came from Diane's poisoned whispers. Aunt Linda, a woman whose jewelry weighed more than her conscience, leaned over my chair. "Quinn, dear," she cooed, "we were so surprised you came. We heard you were, well, having a hard time." "Is that so?" I asked politely. "Yes," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Diane mentioned you were struggling with some mental health issues, that you couldn't hold down a job. Is it true you are working as a waitress?" "I manage," I said. It wasn't a lie. "I managed a $50 million supply chain. I get by, Aunt Linda." "And no husband yet," Cousin Sarah chimed in, swirling her Chardonnay. "You are 34. Quinn, the clock is ticking. Maybe if you lowered your standards, I know a very nice man who runs a landscaping crew. He is divorced, but he has steady work." "I appreciate the concern," I said, taking a sip of water. "But I am focused on other things right now." "What other things?" Sarah laughed. "Survival." They laughed. I let them. I let them paint their picture of me. Every insult, every pitying glance, every assumption of my incompetence was just another layer of camouflage. They saw a victim. They did not see the predator sitting right in front of them. I needed air. The perfume and the condescension were becoming suffocating. I slipped out the side door onto the stone terrace balcony. The night air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. "I wondered where you scurried off to." I didn't turn around. I knew the voice. Ethan. He walked up beside me, leaning his elbows on the stone railing. He held a tumbler of expensive scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other. He looked like a caricature of a business tycoon, a boy playing dress-up in his father's world. "Enjoying the free booze?" Ethan asked, taking a drag of the cigar. "Drink up. It is the best stuff you will taste all year." "It is a nice party, Ethan," I said. "It is a coronation," he corrected me. "Dad is stepping up to chairman. I am taking over daily operations officially next week. The board is eating out of my hand. I turned to look at him. He was flushed with alcohol and victory. Are they? I asked. I heard there were some issues with the Northeast distribution grid. Ethan stiffened. He looked at me with genuine surprise. How would you know about that? I read the papers. I lied. Fake news, Ethan scoffed. We had a few hiccups, but we fixed it. We brought in this outside firm, top tier. I managed the whole deal. They report to me. I snapped my fingers, and they cleaned up the mess. I felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in my throat. He was talking about me. He was standing there, bragging to my face about how he controlled my company, completely unaware that the woman he was sneering at was the one signing his paychecks. You manage them? I asked softly. They must be very good. They are effective, Ethan said dismissively, but they are just vendors, servants, really, like everyone else. You pay them enough. They do what they are told. That is the secret to business. Quinn, something you wouldn't understand. You buy the talent you don't have. Is that right? Look at you, he sneered, looking me up and down. Playing businesswoman in your little vintage dress. Do you even have a job, Quinn? Or are you still scraping by on whatever scraps you can find? I have a project, I said. It keeps me busy. A project, he laughed. That is cute. Maybe one day you can sell cookies or something. Listen, enjoy the party. But don't try to talk to the investors. We don't need you embarrassing the brand. He patted my shoulder too hard. Dismissive taps and walked back inside. I watched him go. I looked at the moon hanging over the Connecticut tree line. Goodbye, Ethan, I whispered. I waited 5 minutes. Then I returned to the ballroom. I walked back to table 19. I sat down. The lights dimmed. The spotlight hit the stage. Gordon walked out. The room erupted in applause. The speech began. It was the same speech I described before, but living through it a second time, surrounded by the heat of the bodies and the smell of roast duck. It felt different. It didn't feel like humiliation anymore. It felt like confirmation. When he said the words uneducated and worthless, I didn't feel the sting I had felt 14 years ago. I felt the click of a lock engaging. He had just handed me the moral high ground in front of 200 witnesses. I stood up. I raised the glass. I poured the champagne. I walked out. The walk to the parking lot was a blur of adrenaline. The cool air hit my face, drying the sweat on my brow. I reached my car, my hand trembling not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what was about to happen. Then came the shouting. Quinn! The confrontation in the parking lot was the final act of their delusion. Diane grabbing my arm, Gordon red-faced and panting, Ethan looking confused and angry. You ungrateful little brat! Diane shrieked. Her mask completely gone. You ruined the toast. You ruined everything. I simply agreed with him, I said, opening my car door. He said I was nothing. I removed myself. You should be happy. You are cut off, Gordon roared, slamming his hand on the roof of my car. Do you hear me? I am calling the lawyers tomorrow. I am writing you out of the will. I am stripping you of the Howard name. I don't need your name. Gordon, I said. I have my own. You have nothing, Ethan shouted, stepping forward. You are a nobody. And if you think you can sue us for a share of the company, I will bury you in legal fees until you starve. I stopped. I looked at Ethan, then I looked at Gordon. The wind rustled the leaves of the ornamental trees lining the parking lot. The silence stretched between us, heavy and electric. You want to talk about law? I asked. My voice was low, devoid of emotion. You want to talk about business? I want you to get in your car and disappear. Gordon spat. I will, I said. But know this, the days of you bullying me at the dinner table are over. The days of you controlling me with money I never took are over. I stepped into the driver's side, but before I closed the door, I looked Gordon dead in the eye. From now on, I said, articulating every syllable, everything between us will be spoken through contracts. I slammed the door before he could respond. I saw his mouth open, but the sound was cut off by the glass and steel. I locked the doors. I started the engine. I drove away. I watched them shrink in the rearview mirror, three small, angry figures standing under the harsh yellow light of a street lamp, thinking they had just won a family argument. I merged onto the highway. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of recycled air conditioning and freedom. My phone, mounted on the dashboard, lit up. It was a text from Jonah Pierce. I glanced at the screen. The message was long. Jonah. They just emailed again. They are panicking. They want to lock in a 5-year renewal immediately. They are offering to increase our retainer fee by 15%. They said their internal projections show a catastrophic failure in logistics if Northbridge pulls out. They are literally begging. Quinn. What do I tell them? I stared at the glowing text. A smile spread across my face, a real, genuine smile. They weren't just begging for a contract. They were begging for their lives. And they were begging the very person they had just cast out into the dark. Tell them nothing, I said aloud. Let them sweat. The fallout from the party was immediate and meticulously orchestrated. By Monday morning, the narrative had been set. I didn't need to be in the room to hear it. The whispers traveled through the social grapevine and landed in my inbox via concerned acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. The story was simple. Quinn Howard had a breakdown. The poor girl, overwhelmed by jealousy of her successful brother and stable father, had made a scene due to some vague, unstated mental instability. I was painted as fragile, erratic, and deeply envious. It was a smart move. It delegitimized anything I might say before I even opened my mouth. Who would believe the rantings of the crazy daughter against the word of the chairman? But while they were busy spinning stories in the country club, I was watching the red lights blink on my server dashboard. On Tuesday afternoon, a call came into Northbridge's main line. It wasn't the usual procurement officer we dealt with. It was someone from their legal compliance department. We are just doing some routine vendor due diligence, the voice on the other end said. We heard some interesting rumors about your ownership structure. We'd like to update our files on who exactly the beneficial owners of Northbridge are. They were digging. Someone had connected a dot. Maybe I had been too confident. Maybe a signature on an old document had surfaced. They didn't know yet if they knew. They wouldn't be asking, but they smelled smoke. I hung up the phone and looked at the wall of monitors in my office. My anonymity had been my shield for 7 years. It had allowed me to build an empire without my father's shadow darkening the door. But shadows disappear when you turn on the lights. It is time, I whispered. I drove into the city to meet Marianne Crowell. Marianne was 60 years old. With hair the color of steel wool and eyes that could spot a loophole from a mile away, she was not just my lawyer. She had been my grandmother Rose's lawyer. She was the only person in the world, besides Jonah, who knew the full map of the battlefield. Her office smelled of old paper and expensive coffee. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid the contract between Northbridge Optimization Group and Howard Med Transit on the mahogany desk. It was thick, bound in plastic, and filled with clauses that I had practically memorized. The termination clause is standard, Marianne said, tapping page 42 with a manicured finger. Section 8, paragraph C. Either party may terminate the agreement without cause with 30 days written notice. No penalties, no buyout required, just a clean break. Clean as a surgical suite, I murmured. Legally, yes, Marianne said, leaning back in her leather chair. Commercially, it is a bloodbath for them. I looked at the dependency report Jonah sent over. Quinn, you aren't just a vendor, you are their central nervous system. If you pull out, they don't just lose efficiency, they lose the ability to track their high-value shipments in real time. Their insurance premiums will triple overnight. Their biggest client, the Veterans Affairs contract. That requires 99% tracking accuracy. Without your algorithms, they drop to 85% within a week. I stared at the document. This was it. The button. The nuclear option. If I sign this termination letter, I said. I am destroying my father's legacy. No, Marianne corrected me sharply. You are ceasing to subsidize it. There is a difference. They built a house on land they didn't own. You are just taking the land back. I stood up and walked to the window. The city traffic crawled below, a river of red taillights. I thought about the party. I thought about the laughter. I thought about Gordon standing on that stage, calling me worthless. But then I thought about Rose, my grandmother, the woman who had taught me to play chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Revenge is messy. Quinn, she had told me once, it stains your hands. Justice is clean. Don't be cruel. Just tell the truth. Let the truth do the heavy lifting. I didn't want to destroy the company. There were 500 employees at Howard Med Transit drivers, warehouse workers, dispatchers who had done nothing to me. They didn't deserve to lose their livelihoods because my father was a narcissist. I don't want to burn it down, I said, turning back to Marianne. I just want them to know who holds the matches. So, what is the play? Marianne asked. We send the termination notice, I said. Strictly professional, 30 days. We offer a transition period, for a fee. We act like the rational business partners they claim we are. But I'm also sending a personal letter to Gordon. It won't be on Northbridge letterhead. It will be from his daughter. Marianne raised an eyebrow. Risky. If you put it in writing, he can use it. Let him, I said. It is just a cover letter for the contract. I want him to read the termination notice knowing exactly whose hand signed it. I sat down and drafted the letter right there in Marianne's office. It was short. Dear Gordon, enclosed is the formal notice of termination for the service agreement between Northbridge Optimization Group and Howard Med Transit. You mentioned at the club that I was uneducated and worthless. You also mentioned to your board that Northbridge was a genius partner. I thought it was time to resolve that contradiction. I am Northbridge. You have 30 days to find a new genius. Quinn. I handed the draft to Marianne. She read it, and a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. Brutal, she said, and entirely factual. She slid a thick file folder across the desk toward me. It was red. There is one more thing, Marianne said, her voice dropping an octave. We need to talk about the contingency. What contingency? Your grandmother left instructions, Marianne said. She knew Gordon. She knew that if you ever stood up to him, he wouldn't just get angry, he would get vindictive. He would try to destroy your reputation to save his own ego. She opened the red folder. Inside were documents I recognized, financial statements from 15 years ago, trust fund ledgers, and copies of emails between Gordon and his old accountant. This is the file, Marianne said. The evidence of what he did to your mother's estate. The evidence of the funds he misappropriated to cover his bad investments in 08. It is all here. Statute of limitations has passed for some of the criminal charges, but the civil liability, the fraud against the shareholders, that is fresh ammunition. I looked at the papers. I saw my mother's name. I saw the numbers, hundreds of thousands of dollars that were supposed to be for my future, siphoned off to pay for Ethan's mistakes and Gordon's vanity. I don't want to use this unless I have to, I said quietly. This destroys the family name. It hurts everyone. That is why it is a contingency, Marianne said. But I need to know. Quinn, if they come for you, and they will if they start leaking stories to the press that you are mentally unstable, that you are incompetent, that you are trying to blackmail them, are you willing to pull this trigger? I ran my hand over the cool paper of the file. I remembered Diane's grip on my arm. I remembered Ethan's sneer. You have nothing. If they keep it professional, I said. This stays in the drawer, but if they make it personal, if they try to erase me again. I looked up at Marianne. Then we turn on the lights, I said. All of them. Marianne nodded and closed the folder. I will have the courier deliver the package tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. I left her office and drove back to Northbridge. The building was quiet, the night shift crew humming along in the data center. I walked into my office and sat in the dark for a long time. Jonah came in around 8 p.m. He looked tired. "The models are finished," he said, dropping a report on my desk. "If we pull out, their on-time delivery rate drops to 62% by day 45. They lose the VA contract by day 90. Gordon misses his quarterly earnings target by 40%. The stock tanks. And if they find a replacement," I asked. "There is no replacement," Jonah said. "Not one that can integrate in 30 days. We built their API from scratch. Quinn, it is proprietary. To replace us, they have to rip out their entire digital infrastructure and rebuild it. That is a 6-month project. Minimum. They are in a corner." "Good," I said. "Are you sure about this?" Jonah asked. "Once we send that letter, there is no going back. They set the course 14 years ago." "Jonah," I said, turning my chair to look at the city skyline. "I am just driving the bus." I picked up my phone. I had one text message from Ethan. "Ethan, Dad is still furious. You better hope you have a good lawyer if you ever want to see a dime of inheritance." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. In 12 hours, he was going to realize that the inheritance was the least of his problems. "Send it," I told Jonah. "Send the termination notice, and send the personal letter. Tonight. First thing in the morning," I said. "Let them have one last night of sleep." I went home to my apartment, a nice place now. Bought with my own money, with a view of the river. I poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony. I felt a strange sense of vertigo. I was about to push a boulder off a cliff, and I was tethered to it. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the fall. I was the one controlling gravity. My phone buzzed again. It was Marianne. Marianne. One question I forgot to ask. If they beg. "If Gordon calls you crying," I typed back instantly. "Quinn, he doesn't know how to cry. He only knows how to negotiate." I put the phone down. The city lights blurred in the distance. Tomorrow, the world would change. Tomorrow, the worthless daughter would become the most expensive mistake Gordon Howard ever made. The tracking notification on my monitor turned green at exactly 9 in the morning. It was a simple digital confirmation, a sterile line of text that read, "Delivered. Signed by P. Lane." Patricia Lane was my father's executive assistant. She was a woman of rigid habits who opened the mail precisely 15 minutes after it arrived. I sat in my office chair, my hands resting flat on the cool surface of my desk, and I watched the minutes tick by on the digital clock in the corner of my screen. 9:05, 9:10, 9:14, at 9:15. My phone, which was sitting face down on the desk, vibrated. It was a short, sharp buzz against the wood. Then another, then a long, sustained vibration that meant a call was coming through. I did not turn the phone over. I knew who it was. The vibration stopped for 3 seconds, then started again immediately. I imagined Gordon sitting at his massive mahogany desk, the termination letter in one hand and my personal note in the other, his face turning that dangerous shade of purple. He would be slamming the receiver down, dialing again, unable to comprehend that I was not answering. For 34 years, when Gordon Howard called, people jumped, they scrambled, they apologized for not picking up on the first ring. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still hot. By 9:30, the vibration was constant. It was a drumbeat of panic. I finally flipped the phone over to check the notifications, purely for data collection purposes. 12 missed calls from Gordon, 7 missed calls from Ethan, 5 missed calls from Diane. The text messages were piling up like a digital car crash. "Gordon, pick up the phone. Now." "Ethan, is this a joke? You are going to jail for fraud." "Diane, your father is having chest pains. Answer us." "Gordon, call me immediately. We need to talk about the contract." "Ethan, you can't just cancel. We have a deal." "Gordon Quinn, answer me." I read them with a detached clinical interest. For 14 years, I had been the one waiting by the phone. I had been the one sending messages that went unanswered for days. I had been the one hoping for a scrap of attention, a return call, an acknowledgement of my existence. They had taught me that silence was the ultimate power move. They had taught me that ignoring someone was the most effective way to say they did not matter. I was simply returning the lesson. I put the phone on silent mode and slid it into my drawer. I had a company to run. I had a meeting with my operations team at 10 o'clock to discuss the new optimization protocols for a pharmaceutical client in Ohio. I walked into that meeting, projected my slides, and led the discussion for an hour. My staff had no idea that the most powerful family in the logistics industry was currently melting down because of the woman standing at the whiteboard. The morning passed in a blur of productivity. I felt a strange, electric clarity. It was the feeling of a ghost finally becoming solid. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the intercom on my desk buzzed. It was Sarah, our receptionist, Ms. Howard. Sarah's voice sounded tight. Nervous. I am sorry to disturb you, but there are 3 people here to see you. They do not have an appointment, but they say they are your family. They are very insistent. I paused. They had driven 2 hours from Westport. They had dropped everything, their meetings, their country club lunches, their pretenses to come to me. They were desperate. It is fine. Sarah, I said calmly, show them to conference room B. I will be there in 5 minutes. Conference room B? Sarah asked. The glass one. Yes, I said. The glass one. I wanted them in the fishbowl. Conference room B was a centerpiece of our office design. It was a rectangular box of floor-to-ceiling glass located right in the middle of the open-plan workspace. Everyone could see inside. It was soundproof, so no one could hear the shouting. But everyone could see the body language. It was a stage. If Gordon wanted to scream, if Ethan wanted to posture, they would have to do it in full view of 20 of my employees. They would have to behave, or they would look like lunatics attacking a calm, professional CEO. I checked my reflection in the monitor one last time. I looked sharp, professional, unbothered. I picked up the red file folder containing the original incorporation documents of Northbridge Optimization Group, the physical proof of my ownership, and walked out of my office. The walk to the conference room felt like walking into an arena. But this time, I was the gladiator with the sword. They were already inside. Gordon was pacing the length of the room. He looked like he had aged 10 years since the party on Saturday. His tie was slightly askew, and the confident, tanned glow of the king of logistics had been replaced by a gray waxen pallor. Diane was sitting in one of the ergonomic chairs, clutching her Chanel bag to her chest like a shield. She looked around the office with wide, frightened eyes, taking in the bustle of the analysts, the wall of monitors, the sheer scale of the operation I had built. She looked terrified, as if she had woken up in a foreign country where her currency was worthless. Ethan was standing by the window, his arms crossed, staring at a young analyst who was coding nearby. He looked angry, but it was the brittle anger of a child who has realized the game is rigged against him. I opened the glass door and stepped inside. I let the door click shut behind me, sealing us in the silence. "Good afternoon," I said. Gordon stopped pacing. He spun around. For a second, I thought he was going to lunge at me. His hands balled into fists, and his eyes bulged. But then he looked through the glass walls. He saw my staff working. He saw the eyes glancing up. He saw the witnesses. He unclenched his fists, but his voice was a low, shaking growl. "What is this?" Quinn Gordon asked. He held up the termination letter, crumpled in his hand. "Is this some kind of sick revenge prank? Because it is not funny. It is corporate sabotage. It is a standard termination notice." "Gordon," I said, moving to the head of the table. I did not sit down. 30 days, as per the contract you signed. You can't be Northbridge." Ethan spat, stepping away from the window. "Northbridge is a premier firm. It is run by Jonah Pierce. We have met him. He is a professional. Jonah Pierce is my employee." I said. "He is my CFO. He answers to me." "Liar." Ethan said. "You are lying. You are just trying to scare us. You don't own this place. You couldn't run a lemonade stand, let alone a logistics firm." I didn't argue. I simply placed the red folder on the table. I opened it. The documents were laid out clearly. The articles of incorporation, dated 7 years ago, the ownership structure, the bank authorizations. Every single page bore one signature at the bottom. Quinn Alexandra Howard. Ethan looked down at the papers. I watched his eyes scan the lines. I watched the color drain from his face. He reached out to touch the paper, as if testing to see if it was real. "It is not possible," Diane whispered from her chair. You lived above a laundromat. We saw the address on your tax forms years ago." "I lived cheap, so I could invest," I said. "While you were buying Ethan a new car every 2 years, I was buying servers. While you were vacationing in the Hamptons, I was building algorithms." "But you don't have a degree," Diane blurted out. It was her automatic defense, the only metric she knew how to value. "How can you run this? You are a dropout. You have no MBA. You have no credentials." I looked at Diane. I felt a surge of pity for her. She was so trapped in her small, rigid world of status symbols that she couldn't understand the language of merit. "I have results." "Diane," I said, "the results that saved your husband's company 2 years ago. The results that you have been bragging about to your shareholders. You don't need a diploma to be efficient. You just need to be smarter than the problem. And for the last 2 years, I have been smarter than your problems." Gordon had not looked at the papers. He was looking at me. He was really seeing me. Perhaps for the first time in his life. He wasn't seeing the disappointed daughter. He was seeing a rival. He was seeing a force that had quietly, methodically encircled him while he was busy admiring his own reflection. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. The fight seemed to leak out of him. He looked at the termination letter on the table. "If you cancel this contract," Gordon said, his voice raspy, "we go under. You know that. We can't replace the routing system in 30 days. We will miss our delivery windows. The VA will pull their contract. The stock will plummet." "I know." I said, "I wrote the projection models." "Why?" Gordon asked. He sounded genuinely baffled. "Why would you do this? We are your family." "Family," I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. "Family is what you paraded on stage on Saturday night. Family is the son you groomed and the wife you showcased." I wasn't family. Gordon, I was the cautionary tale. I was the punchline. "I was trying to motivate you," Gordon insisted, his narcissism flaring up even in defeat. "I was tough on you because I wanted you to toughen up, and look, it worked. You built this." He gestured around the room, trying to claim credit for my success. He was trying to rewrite history in real time. "You didn't build this," I said coldly. "You tried to bury me. I dug my way out. Do not dare try to take credit for my survival." "We can fix this," Ethan said, his voice rising in panic. "Quinn, look, we can renegotiate. We will pay more. We will give you a seat on the board. We can announce it. Howard family reunites. It will be great PR. We can spin this. I don't want a seat on your board." "Ethan," I said, "I don't want your PR, and I certainly don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" Gordon slammed his hand on the table. It was a cry of frustration from a man who only understood transactions. "Everyone has a price." "What is it?" "You want an apology." "Fine. I am sorry. I am sorry I was hard on you." "Is that what you want?" "You want public recognition. I will give you an award. Just tell me the number." "Quinn, what do you want?" I looked at them, the 3 of them, sitting in my glass box, surrounded by the empire I had built from nothing. They were offering me the things I had cried for when I was 20. They were offering me the validation I had starved for. But standing there, I realized I didn't need it. Their validation was worthless currency. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table, looking directly into my father's eyes. "I don't want your money." "Gordon," I said softly, "I have more than you do. I don't want your apology, because it is not real, and I don't want your recognition, because I know who I am." Then what Gordon whispered, "What is the point of all this? I just want you to know the truth." I said, "I want you to know that the person you called worthless is the only reason you still have a company. I want you to know that for 2 years, you have been eating from my hand, And I want you to know that when you lose it all in 30 days, it won't be because of the market. It won't be because of bad luck. It will be because you chose to mock the one person who was holding the roof up. I straightened up and buttoned my blazer. That is what I want, I said. I want you to sit with that truth. Now, please leave my building. You are trespassing. Gordon sat frozen. Ethan looked like he was about to be sick. Diane was weeping silently, her mascara running down her cheek. I walked to the door and held it open. Security is on the way up, I said. I suggest you go before they get here. It would be embarrassing for you to be escorted out. Gordon stood up slowly. He looked at me one last time. There was no hate in his eyes anymore, just fear, pure, unadulterated fear. He walked past me, out the door, and down the hallway. Ethan and Diane followed him, heads bowed. I watched them go. I watched them get into the elevator. When the doors closed, I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 14 years. My hands were shaking, just a little, but it wasn't weakness. It was the adrenaline of a burden finally being set down. I turned back to the conference table to pick up my folder. That was when I saw it. Diane had left her phone on the table in her haste. The screen was lit up with a notification. It was an email preview. I shouldn't have looked, but the subject line caught my eye. Subject ERE, the Miles Howard Trust. Urgent. I froze. Miles Howard was my uncle, Gordon's brother, the one who had disappeared from the family 20 years ago, the one no one talked about. Why was Diane getting emails about a trust fund with his name on it? I picked up the phone. I didn't unlock it. I couldn't, but the preview text was visible. Gordon needs to be careful. If Quinn ever finds out about the original allocation from her mother's estate that Miles managed, the fraud charges won't just be civil. The screen went black. I stared at the dark glass of the phone. The victory I had felt seconds ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. This wasn't just about my college tuition. This wasn't just about Gordon being cheap. There was something else, something older, something criminal. I grabbed my own phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 decades, hoping the contact information I had found in my grandmother's old address book was still valid. It rang once, twice. Hello. A male voice answered, older, raspy, but familiar. Uncle Miles, I asked. There was a long silence on the other end. Quinn, he whispered, is that you? It is me, I said. We need to talk. I think Gordon stole more than just my tuition. I knew this day would come. Miles said, I have been waiting for your call for 14 years. The 48 hours following the confrontation in my glass-walled conference room were not filled with the silence of defeat. They were filled with the noise of war. Gordon Howard did not know how to lose. He only knew how to escalate. When he realized that his presence in my office had failed to intimidate me, and that his emotional appeals had bounced off my armor, he shifted tactics with the speed of a rattlesnake coiling to strike. The apology tour was over. The Scorched Earth campaign had begun. It started on Wednesday morning. I arrived at Northbridge to find my legal inbox flooding with notifications. Gordon had unleashed his lawyers. They were not sending standard correspondence. They were sending threats wrapped in expensive letterhead. They claimed breach of contract, though there was none. They claimed intellectual property theft, which was laughable since I wrote the code. They claimed fiduciary negligence. It was a blizzard of paperwork designed to bury me, to scare me, to make me bleed money and legal fees until I suffocated. But Gordon did not stop at the law. He went for my reputation. At 10 o'clock, I received a call from one of our secondary vendors, a trucking fleet manager in Ohio. He sounded uncomfortable. Quinn, he said, hesitating. I just got a call from Gordon Howard. He is suggesting that Northbridge is under federal investigation for data privacy violations. He implied that anyone doing business with you might get dragged into it. He is lying, Mike, I said, my voice steady. He is trying to scare you because he is losing his biggest contract. Did he show you any proof? No, Mike admitted. But he is Gordon Howard. His word carries weight. His word is depreciating faster than his stock price, I said. I will have my lawyer send you a certification of our compliance status within the hour. Do not let him bully you. I hung up, my hand gripping the phone tight enough to turn my knuckles white. This was the dirty phase. Gordon was trying to blacklist me in the industry he thought he owned. He was willing to burn down his own reputation just to singe mine. I called Marianne Crowell immediately. They are getting aggressive, I told her. I know, Marianne replied, her voice crisp. I just got off the phone with their general counsel. They are threatening to file an injunction to stop the termination. They are claiming that Northbridge provides an essential service and that cutting it off endangers public health because of the medical supplies involved. That is a desperate reach, I said. It is, Marianne agreed, but it buys them time, and it paints you as the villain who is willing to let patients suffer just to settle a family score. That was their narrative, the narrative of the cruel, vindictive daughter. By the afternoon, the emotional manipulation began. Diane was the architect of this front. She didn't scream like Gordon. She wheedled. She sent a courier to my apartment. He delivered a box. Inside was a photo album, pictures of me as a child. Awkwardly standing next to Gordon, or sitting in the background of Ethan's birthday parties, there was a note on expensive stationery, smelling of her perfume. Quinn, darling, we are all just so emotional right now. Please, do not let pride destroy us. We are blood. That bond is sacred. Your father is not sleeping. He loves you, in his own way. We can fix this. Just withdraw the letter. We can work out a new deal, a private deal. We can pay you a consulting fee that goes directly to your personal account. Tax-free. No one needs to know. Just come home. I stared at the note. It was a bribe wrapped in a guilt trip. She was offering to launder money to me, tax-free, she claimed, which was illegal in exchange for my compliance. She was trying to turn me into a criminal so they could control me again. I handed the note to Jonah Pierce. Scan this, I said. Send it to Marianne. It is evidence of attempted bribery and tax evasion conspiracy. Jonah looked at the note and shook his head. They really don't know who they are dealing with, do they? No, I said. They think I am still the girl who wants to be invited to dinner. The crack in their armor appeared on Thursday. It came from the weakest link, Ethan. Ethan was panicked. He was the one who had to face the board of directors in 3 weeks. He was the one who had claimed to manage the Northbridge relationship. Now that the safety net was ripped away, he was free-falling. In a conference call between our legal teams, a call I insisted be recorded, Ethan lost his composure. You can't do this, Ethan shouted, his voice cracking over the speakerphone. You don't understand. We don't have the source code. We don't even have the passwords to the subservers. If you turn this off, we are blind. We have $40 million of inventory on the road right now. We won't know where any of it is. Marianne, sitting next to me, smiled like a shark. Mr. Howard, Marianne said smoothly, are you admitting that Howard Med Transit has failed to maintain its own data redundancy protocols? Are you admitting that you have no business continuity plan? I am admitting that we trusted our partner, Ethan yelled, and now she is stabbing us. We are not stabbing you, I said, leaning into the microphone. We are resigning, and frankly, Ethan, your admission just now confirms that your company is negligently managed. You are admitting that you are entirely dependent on a third-party vendor for your core operations. Does your board know that... There was a silence on the line, a heavy, terrified silence. Ethan realized he had just handed us a loaded gun. No private meetings, I said, laying down the law. No phone calls to my personal number, no couriers to my home. From this moment on, every single word between us goes through the lawyers. If Gordon calls my vendors again, I sue for tortious interference. If Diane sends me another bribe, I report it to the IRS. Do you understand? You are a monster. Gordon's voice came over the line, low and venomous. I am a businesswoman. Gordon, I replied. You just never taught me how to be one. I had to learn it from people who actually work for a living. Gordon played his final card then. It was the threat he had been saving. Fine, Gordon said. You want to play hardball? Here's the pitch. If you terminate this contract, 500 people lose their jobs: drivers, warehouse staff, administrative clerks, and I will make sure every single one of them knows your name. I will hold a press conference. I will tell the world that Quinn Howard, the bitter daughter, decided to fire 500 working-class Americans because she has daddy issues. I will destroy your name in this town. You will never sign another client. It was a brutal threat. He was holding his own employees hostage, using their livelihoods as a human shield. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, but I was ready for this. I expected you to say that, I said. Jonah, please forward the document to their counsel. I heard the ding of an email landing in their inbox. What is this? Gordon asked suspiciously. That, I said, is a copy of the transition proposal I sent to your chief operating officer 6 months ago, the one dated August 12th. What? Gordon sounded confused. 6 months ago, Northbridge identified that your dependency on us was becoming a risk, I explained, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. We proposed a soft transition plan. We offered to train your internal IT team. We offered to license the software to you so you could run it yourselves. We offered a 2-year handover to ensure job security for your staff. I paused to let it sink in. And do you know what your COO replied? He said, and I quote, "Management sees no need for unnecessary expenditure on internal training. The current system is cheap and works. Request denied." I heard paper shuffling on the other end. They were reading the email chain. They were seeing the proof that I had tried to save them, and they had been too arrogant to take the lifeline. If you go to the press, Gordon, I continued, if you try to blame me for a single layoff, I will release this entire email chain. I will show the world that I tried to protect those jobs, and you were too cheap to pay for the training. I will show them that the layoffs are not my fault. They are the result of your negligence. You wouldn't, Gordon stammered. Try me, I said. Marianne has the press release drafted. It goes out 5 minutes after you open your mouth. The line went dead. They hung up. I sat back in my chair. My hands were trembling slightly, but I felt a surge of triumph. I had anticipated their moves. I had blocked their punches. We need one more thing, I told Jonah. Gordon thinks he can blacklist me. I need to prove he is wrong. The impossible contract, Jonah asked. The impossible contract, I confirmed. That afternoon, I met with the procurement director of Apex Health Solutions. They were Howard Med Transit's biggest rival, a massive conglomerate that Gordon had been trying to court for a decade. They had always refused him. I walked into the meeting as Quinn Howard, owner of Northbridge. I laid out my data. I showed them how I could save them 12% on their cold chain logistics in the first quarter. They didn't care about my last name. They didn't care about the gossip at the country club. They cared about the numbers. I signed the contract at 4 o'clock. It was worth 3 times the value of the Howard deal. I sent a copy of the signature page to Gordon's lawyer with a simple note. Northbridge is doing just fine. Do not worry about us. I was leaving the office late that evening when my phone rang. It was the lawyer's line again, connecting a conference call. One last thing, Gordon said. He sounded tired, defeated, but there was still that edge of arrogance. You think you have won, Quinn, but you are losing the only family you have. You are choosing money over blood. I am not choosing money, I said into the darkness of the parking lot. I am choosing dignity. You will regret this, Gordon said. When I am gone, you will regret that our last conversation was a negotiation. Gordon, I said, stopping by my car. You are not afraid of losing me. You never cared about having me. You are afraid of losing the image you built of yourself. You are afraid that people will find out that the great Gordon Howard is just a fraud who got lucky. I hung up before he could respond. I got into my car and drove toward the river. The city lights were blurring in the distance. I felt heavy, but it was the good kind of heavy, the weight of reality, not the weight of lies. My phone buzzed again. I thought it was Gordon coming back for another round. I almost didn't answer, but the number on the screen was different. It was the number from the other night, The number I had called in a moment of desperation. I answered it. "Hello." "Quinn," the voice said. It was raspier than I remembered from my childhood, worn down by years of silence. "It is Uncle Miles." "Miles," I breathed. "I didn't think you would call back." "I had to be sure it was safe," Miles said. "I had to be sure you were really fighting him." "I am fighting him," I said. "I am ending it." "Good," Miles said, "because there is something you need to know. The trust fund. The money Gordon stole. That is just the surface. Quinn." "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel. "You think he pushed you down because you were a girl," Miles said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think he favored Ethan because he was the son. That is what he wanted you to believe. But that is not the reason." "Then what is the reason?" "He didn't hate you because you were worthless, Quinn," Miles said, and his next words made the blood freeze in my veins. "He hated you because your mother left half the company to you, not him. You are not just the owner of Northbridge. Technically, if we find the original will he buried, you are the majority shareholder of Howard Med Transit." I drove to meet Miles at a diner in a town 3 towns over. A place where the vinyl seats were cracked and the coffee was served in thick, chipped mugs. It was neutral ground, far away from the country clubs and the watchful eyes of Westport. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The last time I'd seen my uncle, I was 12 years old. He had been a vibrant, laughing man who used to sneak me candy bars. Now, he looked like a man who had been eroding for a decade. He was thin, his shoulders hunched, wearing a jacket that had seen better days. He stood up when he saw me. He didn't hug me. He just looked at me with a mixture of awe and shame. "You look like her," Miles said, his voice rough. "You look exactly like your mother." I sat down across from him. I didn't want small talk. I wanted answers. The adrenaline from my confrontation with Gordon was still humming in my blood, but it was starting to sour into dread. "Tell me," I said. "You said on the phone that Gordon stole from me. You said it wasn't just about him being cheap." Miles nodded. He reached into a battered leather satchel and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He didn't open it immediately. He put his hand over it, as if trying to keep the truth contained for just one more minute. "Your mother, Catherine, was the smart one," Miles began. "Gordon was the face, but Catherine had the financial mind. Before she got sick, she saw things. She saw how Gordon spent money. She saw his ego, and she was terrified of what would happen to you if she wasn't there to protect you." I felt a lump form in my throat. I had so few memories of my mother. To hear that she had been worrying about me, planning for me, was a physical ache. "She set up a trust," Miles said. "The Catherine Howard Education Trust. It was separate from the family estate. It was irrevocable. She funded it with her own inheritance and some early stock options she had exercised. By the time you were 18, that trust was worth nearly $450,000. I stared at him. $450,000. That was enough for Harvard. That was enough for medical school. That was enough to start a life without ever having to ask anyone for a dime. "What happened to it?" I asked, though I already felt the cold answer settling in my stomach. 2008 happened, Miles said. The market crashed. Gordon was leveraged to the hilt on a warehouse expansion he didn't need. He was facing a margin call that would have wiped him out. He would have lost the company. He would have lost the house. He would have lost his status. "So he took it," I said. It wasn't a question. "He was the executor," Miles whispered, looking down at his coffee. "He found a loophole. He claimed emergency administrative necessity. He drained the account, every cent. He used your college money to cover his bad bets. And he didn't put it back," I said. "He meant to," Miles said quickly, as if defending a ghost. "He always said he would. But then the market recovered, and he had cash again. But instead of repaying your trust, he bought the boat. He renovated the kitchen for Diane. And then," Miles hesitated, Then Ethan needed to get into that prep school, and Ethan needed a car, and Ethan needed the right clothes. I closed my eyes. All those years I sat at the dinner table, listening to Gordon lecture me about the value of $1. All those years he told me we couldn't afford my tuition. He looked me in the eye and told me I had to drop out because of hard times, while he was wearing a watch bought with my tuition money. He didn't just steal the money, Miles, I said, opening my eyes. He stole my future. He stole the life my mother wanted for me. I know, Miles said, and I let him. Why? I asked. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you stop him? Because I was weak, Miles admitted. His voice broke. Gordon threatened to cut me off too. I was going through a divorce. I needed my dividends from the company. He told me that if I breathed a word to you or anyone else, he would freeze me out. He would destroy me. So I took the check, and I looked the other way. He pushed the envelope across the table toward me. I am sorry, Quinn, he said. I have carried this guilt every day, but when I heard what you did, when I heard you stood up to him at the club, I knew it was time. I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of bank statements from 2008. I saw the transfer logs. Debit, Catherine Howard Trust, credit Howard Med Transit General Operating Fund. I saw the memo line on one of the internal emails from Gordon to his accountant. I read the words on the page. Subject liquidity issue. Transfer the funds from the girl's account. She is only 14. She won't need it for years. We will figure something out by then. Just save the ship. The girl, not Quinn, not his daughter, just an asset to be liquidated. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I felt a strange, icy calm descending over me. It was the same calm I felt when I analyzed a broken supply chain. This wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was data. It was the missing variable that explained the entire equation of my life. It wasn't that I was worthless, I said softly, tracing my mother's signature on the trust formation document. It was that I was valuable, and he had already spent me. There is more, Miles said. Turn to the back. I flipped through the stack of papers until I reached a handwritten note on yellow legal paper. The handwriting was sharp, angular. It wasn't my mother's. Grandma Rose, I whispered. Rose found out, Miles said. She found out 3 years after he did it. That was why they fought. That was why she stopped coming to Thanksgiving. She threatened to turn him in to the authorities for fraud. Why didn't she? I asked. Because she knew Gordon would drag the whole family down with him, Miles explained. If he went to prison, the company would collapse. You would have nothing. Ethan would have nothing. So she made a deal with him. She agreed to stay silent, but in exchange, she demanded he leave her alone, and she started her own plan. The mentorship, I realized. The Sunday phone calls. She couldn't give you the money he stole, Miles said. She didn't have that kind of cash liquid, but she gave you the education he tried to deny you. She taught you the business. She told me once, Gordon stole her inheritance, so I'm going to give her the skills to build a bigger one. I looked at the documents again. This was the smoking gun. This was proof of fiduciary fraud, embezzlement, and a decade-long cover-up. Can I keep these? I asked. They are yours, Miles said. Do whatever you have to do. Quinn, burn him down. I left the diner with the envelope tucked under my arm. The drive back to the city was a blur. I went straight to Marianne's office. I didn't even call ahead. I walked in, bypassed the receptionist, and laid the documents on her desk. Read this, I said. Marianne put on her glasses. She read the trust deed. She read the transfer logs. She read the email. Her face went pale, then red, then a distinct shade of professional fury. My God, Marianne muttered. This is textbook embezzlement. He breached his fiduciary duty as a trustee. He commingled funds. He defrauded a minor. Is it criminal? I asked. The statute of limitations on the theft itself might be tricky because it was 14 years ago, Marianne said, her mind already working through the legal code. But the concealment. The fraud in his financial disclosures. If he filed tax returns that didn't declare this, if he signed corporate audit letters representing that the company finances were clean when they were propped up by stolen trust funds, yes, that is criminal. And civilly, you could sue him for the principal, plus interest, plus punitive damages. You could own his house by the time the jury is done. She looked up at me. Quinn, this is the end of him. If you release this, he is not just bankrupt, he is a pariah. He might go to prison. I stood by the window. Looking out at the skyline I had conquered on my own, I thought about the man who had called me uneducated. I thought about the man who had looked at me with contempt because I didn't have a degree. Knowing full well he was the reason I didn't have one, I held the power to destroy him completely. I could leak this to the press. I could send it to the district attorney. I could watch the police walk him out of his office in handcuffs. But then I heard Rose's voice again. Don't be cruel. Just tell the truth. Was destroying him the truth, or was it just vengeance? I don't want him in prison, I said slowly. I don't want to be the daughter who sent her father to jail. That is a stain that never washes off. So what do you want to do? Marianne asked. You can't just let this slide. I won't, I said. But I want to use it as a shield, not a sword. He is threatening to blacklist me. He is threatening to lie about me to the press. I want him to know that if he throws one more stone, I will bring the mountain down on his head. Marianne nodded, respecting the decision. She began organizing the papers back into the file. We will draft a preservation letter. We will let his lawyers know we have newly discovered evidence regarding the Catherine Howard Trust. That phrase alone will make his blood run cold. Wait, I said. I had noticed something on the very last page of the documents Miles had given me. It was a document signed by Rose, dated just a few months before she died. It was attached to a separate, smaller trust she had left for me, the seed money I had used to start Northbridge, though I hadn't known the full details at the time. What is this clause? I asked, pointing to paragraph 14. Marianne squinted at the text. She read it silently. Then she read it again. Her eyes widened. Oh, Marianne said. A slow smile spread across her face. Rose was a genius, an absolute genius. What does it say? It is a conditional release clause, Marianne explained. She set up a protocol with the firm holding her estate records. She knew Gordon would try to rewrite history after she was gone. This clause says that if Gordon Howard or any entity controlled by him ever publicly initiates a defamation suit or makes verifiable public disparagement against Quinn Howard, the full accounting of the Catherine Howard Trust, the theft, the cover-up, everything is automatically released to the company's independent auditors and the state ethics board. I stared at the paper. Rose had set a trap from the grave. She knew Gordon couldn't help himself. She knew that eventually, his ego would force him to attack me, and she had rigged the building to blow up if he did. He doesn't know this exists, I said. No, Marianne said. He thinks he buried the secret. He doesn't know his mother put a dead man's switch on it. So, I said, a dangerous realization dawning on me. If Gordon follows through on his threat, if he goes to the press to call me a saboteur, he triggers the clause, Marianne finished. He exposes his own crime. He commits professional suicide. I sat down in the leather chair. The irony was perfect. Gordon was out there right now, rallying his allies, preparing his press release, getting ready to paint me as the villain. He was loading his cannon, completely unaware that Rose had plugged the barrel. Do we warn him? Marianne asked. I thought about it. I thought about the way he had dismissed me. I thought about the way he had looked at me in the glass conference room, demanding to know what I wanted, offering me money he had stolen from me. No, I said. We don't warn him. We stick to the plan. We terminate the contract professionally. We take the high road. If he chooses to stay on the low road, that is his choice. I stood up. I am going back to the office. We have a transition to manage. Quinn, Marianne said as I reached the door, you are better than them. You know that, right? I know, I said. And that is why I am going to win. I walked out into the cool evening air. The city was alive, indifferent to the drama of the Howard family. I checked my phone. There was a news alert. Breaking Howard Med Transit. CEO calls emergency press conference for tomorrow morning. Sources say he plans to address vendor misconduct and supply chain sabotage. I looked at the screen and felt a strange sense of peace. He was going to do it. He was going to step onto that podium and pull the trigger. I didn't need to push him. I just needed to get out of the way. The unraveling of Howard Med Transit did not happen all at once. It did not look like an explosion. It looked like a slow-motion car crash where the brakes had failed miles ago, and the driver was only just realizing that the steering wheel was disconnected. It started on a Tuesday, exactly 6 days after I had sent the termination notice. The first domino to fall was the Veterans Affairs contract. It was their crown jewel, a government agreement worth $40 million a year that required 98% on-time delivery for critical surgical supplies. Without Northbridge's dynamic routing algorithms, their dispatchers were flying blind. They were routing trucks into storms we would have predicted. They were sending refrigerated units to warehouses that were already at capacity by Wednesday. The complaints were no longer private phone calls. They were official notices of breach. I sat in my office, watching the industry news feeds. It was like watching a patient go into cardiac arrest on a monitor. Their stock is down 4% in pre-market trading, Jonah Pierce said, standing in my doorway with a tablet in his hand. The street knows something is wrong. They are missing pickups in the Midwest corridor. Ethan is manually overriding the dispatch system, I said, looking at the raw data we could still see on the periphery of the network. He is trying to route trucks by zip code instead of by traffic density. He is sending drivers into gridlock. It is a disaster, Jonah said, and the board is starting to ask questions. The board of directors at Howard Med Transit had always been a rubber stamp for Gordon. They were his golf buddies, his old college friends, people who enjoyed the quarterly dividends and didn't ask too many questions about operations. But money has a way of sharpening the senses. When the dividends are threatened, the friendship evaporates. I heard about the board meeting from a source inside the building, a mid-level manager who had realized the ship was sinking and wanted to make sure he had a life raft. He told me the scene was brutal. The boardroom, usually a place of polite nodding, had turned into an interrogation cell. They had dragged Ethan in to explain why the Northeast grid was collapsing. "Why are we dependent on a single vendor for our entire routing logic?" one director had demanded. "Where is the redundancy? Where is the backup plan?" Ethan, sweating in his bespoke suit, had tried to bluff. "We have it under control. It is just a negotiation tactic. Northbridge is trying to squeeze us for fees. We will bring it in-house." "In-house," another director had scoffed. "You fired the entire IT development team 3 years ago to cut costs. Who exactly is going to build this system?" "Ethan, you." Gordon had tried to intervene. He had swept into the room, using his booming voice and his legendary presence to calm the waters. He talked about legacy. He talked about steady hands. He tried to project the image of the titan of industry, but the magic was gone. The board looked at him and didn't see a visionary. They saw an old man who had let his son dismantle the company's infrastructure. They saw a CEO who had spent more time planning his retirement party than securing his supply chain, for the first time in 30 years. Gordon Howard was not the most powerful person in the room. He was just a liability. Outside the boardroom, the rumors were spreading through the business community like wildfire. The story of the retirement party had leaked. People loved irony, and this was Shakespearean. The great Gordon Howard had stood on a stage and called his daughter worthless, only to discover that she held the keys to his entire kingdom. "Have you heard?" I imagined them whispering over martinis at the yacht club. "Gordon's girl runs the logistics. He insulted his own lifeline." It was humiliating for him, and humiliation makes narcissists dangerous. Diane tried to fix it the only way she knew how, with a smile and a lie. She organized an emergency dinner party at their estate. She invited the wives of the board members. the local power brokers, the gossips. It was a reconciliation dinner. She called it. I wasn't invited. Of course. But news travels. She is telling people you are unstable, Marianne Crowell told me over the phone on Thursday night. She is whispering that you are demanding a ransom. She is saying that you are blackmailing the family because you are jealous of Ethan's success. She is painting you as a vindictive, mentally ill woman who is holding the company hostage. Let her talk, I said, looking at the city lights. Words are wind. Marianne, contracts are stone. It is not just talk anymore. Quinn, Marianne said, her voice serious. Check the Business Insider blog. The post went up 10 minutes ago. I opened my laptop. There it was, a blind item, but the details were so specific it might as well have had my photo attached. Title Sabotage, from Within Logistics. Heiress threatens to bankrupt family firm over personal grudge. The article didn't name me, but it described a disgruntled daughter of a major Connecticut logistics empire who was weaponizing her vendor status to settle old family scores. It quoted an anonymous source close to the family, who claimed the daughter had a history of emotional outbursts and was refusing to negotiate in good faith, putting hundreds of jobs at risk. It was a smear piece. It was designed to turn the public against me, to pressure me into folding, to make me look like a monster so they could justify suing me. I felt a cold flash of anger. They were doing exactly what they had done when I was 20. They were rewriting the truth to save their own skin. But this time, I wasn't helpless. And this time, they had made a fatal error. They posted it, I said to Marianne. That is public disparagement. That is a verifiable attack on my professional reputation. It is, Marianne confirmed. And since the source is clearly internal, it triggers the clause. The clause Rose had written, the dead man's switch. Do it, I said. I don't have to do anything, Marianne said softly. The system is automated. Quinn, the moment that article hit a verified news outlet, the protocol we set up with the trust administrators initiated, the packet is already encrypted and en route. I sat back in my chair. Somewhere in a server room, a digital packet of documents was flying through the fiber optic cables. It contained the bank statements from 2008. It contained the emails where Gordon authorized the theft of my tuition. It contained the proof that he had falsified his financial disclosures to the board for a decade. It was not going to the press. Rose was smarter than that. It was going to the independent auditors of Howard Med Transit, and it was going to the legal counsel for the board of directors. It was a targeted strike. It bypassed the court of public opinion and went straight to the court of law. Gordon Howard had just tried to assassinate my character. In doing so, he had just confessed his own crimes to the only people who had the power to fire him. The reaction was almost immediate. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Gordon. I let it ring. He called again, and again, finally. He left a voicemail. I played it on speaker. Quinn. His voice was not angry. It was strangled. It sounded like a man who had just looked over the edge of a cliff and seen the bottom. What did you do? The auditors just called me. They have files. They have... My God. Quinn. They have your mother's trust records. How did they get these? He was panting. You have to stop this, he pleaded. You have to tell them it is a mistake. If they investigate this, I go to jail. Do you hear me? I will die in prison. Is that what you want? I am your father. I didn't call him back. There was nothing to say. I hadn't sent the files. He had sent them. He had pulled the trigger the moment he authorized that smear article. He had walked right into the trap his mother had set for him 10 years ago. The dominoes were falling faster now. On Friday morning, the chaos at Howard Med Transit went from operational to existential. The auditors had notified the board of a credible allegation of executive financial misconduct. The stock trading was halted pending an announcement. Ethan, in a panic, tried to deflect the blame. He sent an email to the entire executive team, copying the board, trying to position himself as the victim of Northbridge's sudden betrayal. But Ethan was not smart. In his haste to blame me, He wrote, "From Ethan Howard, to Executive Committee, subject Northbridge situation. We must take legal action against Northbridge immediately. We knew for months that we were overly reliant on their proprietary code, and we discussed the risk of not having an internal backup, but we decided to prioritize the cost savings. Now they are using that leverage against us." He hit send. He admitted it, in writing, to the board, to the lawyers. He admitted that they knew about the risk. He admitted that they chose to ignore it to save money. He admitted that the failure was not sabotage, but a deliberate management decision to cut corners. It was a confession of negligence. It was professional suicide. My phone buzzed. It was Jonah. "Did you see the leak?" Jonah asked. "Ethan just admitted they ignored our warnings." "I saw it," I said. "He just handed us the defense for any lawsuit they try to file. We offered a transition. They refused. He put it in writing." "It is over, Quinn," Jonah said. "They are done." I looked out the window. It was raining. The city looked gray and washed out. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound sense of closure. The monsters under my bed turned out to be just small, frightened men who were bad at math. Then, the final notification arrived. It was a courier delivery, a physical letter, hand-delivered to my reception desk. Sarah brought it in. She looked wide-eyed. "It is from the Board of Directors of Howard Med Transit," she whispered. "Not Gordon, the board." I opened the envelope. The paper was thick, formal, Ms. Howard. "The Board of Directors has called an emergency session for Monday morning at 9 o'clock regarding the leadership and operational future of Howard Med Transit. In light of recent disclosures regarding financial irregularities involving the executive chairman and the operational dependency on your firm, the board requests your presence. You are not being summoned as a vendor. You are being invited as a key witness and a majority stakeholder representative." I read the last line again. Majority stakeholder representative. Miles was right. The will. The auditors must have found the trail leading back to my mother's original shares, the shares Gordon had suppressed, the voting rights he had stolen along with the cash. They weren't just asking me to testify. They were asking me to come and claim what was mine. I put the letter down on my desk. "Tell the courier I received it," I said to Sarah. "Are you going?" she asked. I stood up and walked to the window, looking toward the direction of the Howard Med Transit headquarters, the tower that Gordon had built on a foundation of sand. "Yes," I said. "I am going. It is time to finish the conversation my father started." I was going back to the room where it happened, but this time I wasn't going to be the girl in the corner. I was going to be the one at the head of the table, and I was going to bring the one thing Gordon Howard feared most: the truth. Monday morning at 9 o'clock. The boardroom of Howard Med Transit felt less like a corporate meeting space and more like an operating theater where a patient was about to be pronounced dead. The air conditioning was set to a low hum, but the room felt suffocating. Around the long mahogany table sat the 12 members of the board of directors, their faces grim. To their right sat the independent auditors, a team of 3 men in gray suits who looked at their files rather than the people. To the left sat the company's legal counsel, looking like they had not slept in 3 days. And at the head of the table sat Gordon Howard. He was wearing his best suit, a charcoal 3-piece that usually signaled power, but today it looked like a costume. His skin was sallow, and his eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally he could not find. Ethan sat beside him, staring at his hands, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. I walked in. I was not wearing a vintage dress this time. I was wearing a tailored black suit, sharp and severe. I did not look at Gordon. I did not look at Ethan. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the seat usually reserved for the opposing counsel in a lawsuit. "Ms. Howard," the lead director, a man named Marcus Thorne, said, "Thank you for joining us." "Mr. Thorne," I replied, placing my briefcase on the table. "I understand this is an emergency session regarding the solvency and leadership of the company." "It is," Thorne said. He glanced at Gordon. "Mr. Howard has formally contested the allegations of financial misconduct. He claims that the documents received by the auditors, the records regarding the Catherine Howard Trust, are a fabrication. He claims this is a personal vendetta orchestrated by you to destroy his reputation. Gordon sat up straighter. It is a smear campaign, he said, his voice trying to find its old boom but failing. My daughter is upset about a family dispute. She has forged these documents to leverage a contract negotiation. It is blackmail, plain and simple. I didn't get angry. I didn't defend myself. I simply opened my briefcase and took out a single piece of paper. It was yellowed with age, preserved in a plastic sleeve. The auditors have verified the bank transfers from 2008, I said calmly. The forensic accounting speaks for itself. But since my father is questioning the intent, I think the board should hear from the one person who knew the truth before any of us did. I slid the paper toward Marcus Thorne. What is this? Thorne asked. It is a letter, I said, written by Rose Howard, my grandmother. It was held in escrow by her estate attorneys, with instructions to be released only if the Catherine Howard Trust was ever legally challenged. Gordon went pale. Mother didn't write anything, he stammered. She was senile at the end. Thorne put on his reading glasses. The room went dead silent. Read it, please, I said. For the record, Thorne cleared his throat. He began to read, his voice echoing off the glass walls. To the board of directors and the future guardians of my granddaughter, if you are reading this, it means my son, Gordon, has finally been cornered. I have known about the theft of Quinn's education fund since 2011. I confronted him. He admitted to using the money to cover his margin calls. I chose not to report him to the police then because I did not want to destroy the company my husband built. However, I know my son. He will not own his mistake. When the time comes, he will try to destroy Quinn to save himself. He will call her crazy. He will call her incompetent. He will try to make her the villain. Do not believe him. I have set up a separate financial structure for Quinn because this family is not safe for her. Gordon views her as an asset to be liquidated, not a daughter to be loved. If this letter is in your hands, it is because he has attacked her. Do not let him win twice. Thorne lowered the paper. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Gordon looked around the table. He saw the faces of men he had known for 20 years, men he had golfed with, men he had drank with, and in their eyes, he saw the one thing he could not survive: disgust. She was old, Gordon whispered. She didn't know what she was writing. The letter was notarized. The company lawyer spoke up for the first time. We have verified the signature. It is authentic. Thorne turned to Gordon. His expression was no longer friendly. It was surgical. The issue, Gordon, is no longer the logistics contract, Thorne said. The issue is that you misappropriated funds from a trust where you had a fiduciary duty. You falsified your personal financial disclosures to this board for a decade. You represented yourself as solvent when you were using stolen money to float your lifestyle. That is fraud. That exposes this company to massive liability. I can pay it back, Gordon pleaded. I have the liquidity now. I will write a check today. It is not about the money, Thorne said. It is about integrity. We cannot have a chairman who embezzles from his own children. The market would eat us alive. Ethan stood up then. He looked desperate, sweat beading on his forehead. You can't fire him, Ethan shouted. If you fire him, the stock crashes. And what about the operations? Quinn is cutting us off. If we don't have Northbridge, we are dead anyway. You are worrying about a trust fund from 14 years ago while the company is burning down today. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is doing this, Ethan yelled. She is the one destroying the jobs. 500 people are going to be on the street because of her. If you side with her, you are killing this company. I stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my jacket. Ethan is right about one thing, I said. The room turned to me. The company is in danger. The logistics grid is collapsing, and 500 people are at risk. I looked at the board. I did not build Northbridge to destroy Howard Med Transit, I said. I built it to optimize it. I have no desire to see 500 innocent people lose their livelihoods because of the incompetence of two men. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a fresh document. I slid it down the table. "This is a new service agreement," I said. Gordon looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "You are renewing." "No," I said coldly. "I am offering a lifeline. Northbridge will agree to a 60-day extension of full services. During that time, my team will come on site. We will train your internal IT staff. We will hand over the routing protocols. We will ensure a seamless transition so that not a single truck is delayed and not a single package is lost." "For what price?" Thorne asked, looking at the contract. "The price is standard," I said. "I am not price gouging you, but there is a non-monetary condition." "What is it?" Thorne asked. "Clause 4, I said. "Northbridge will only execute this transition if the current executive leadership is removed immediately. I will not work with Gordon Howard. I will not work with Ethan Howard. They must be removed from all operational and board positions effective today." Gordon made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "You can't do that," he whispered. "This is my company." "It hasn't been your company for a long time, Gordon," I said. "It has been a company kept alive by my algorithms and your lies." Thorne looked at the contract. He looked at the other directors. They nodded, one by one. It was not a difficult choice. On one side, a fraudster and a collapse. On the other side, a solution and survival. "Motion to accept the Northbridge proposal," Thorne said. "Seconded," another director said. "All in favor." Every hand went up. "Motion carried," Thorne said. He turned to Gordon. "Gordon, we will need your resignation by the end of the hour. If we do not receive it, we will vote to remove you for cause, and we will turn the full auditor's report over to the district attorney. I suggest you retire. Quietly." Gordon slumped in his chair. He looked small, the giant of industry, the man who had terrorized my childhood, was just a deflated balloon in an expensive suit. Ethan tried to speak, but Thorne held up a hand. "You too, Ethan. You are suspended pending an investigation into your negligence regarding the IT infrastructure. Please hand over your badge." I watched as the security guard stepped forward. I watched as Ethan slammed his badge on the table. I watched as Gordon slowly, painfully stood up. Gordon looked at me. His eyes were red. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked confused, as if he couldn't understand how the world had inverted itself. "I made you," Gordon rasped. "I pushed you. That is why you are tough. You should thank me." I looked at him. I thought about the girl who had cried in her room. I thought about the woman who had lived above a laundromat. I thought about the silence I had endured. "I don't owe you anything, Gordon," I said. "Not my success, not my money, and certainly not my gratitude." "I am your father," he said weakly. "Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means you should have protected me." I said. "Instead, you stole from me. You mocked me. You tried to erase me." I walked over to him. I stood close enough that he could see the lack of fear in my eyes. "I don't need you to believe in me," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I don't need you to love me. I just need you to stop bending the truth. The truth is, I am not worthless. And today, everyone knows it." I turned my back on him. "Mr. Thorne," I said, "my team will be here tomorrow at 8 to begin the transition. We will save the jobs." "Thank you, Ms. Howard," Thorne said with genuine respect. I signed the contract. Then, I pulled one last document from my briefcase. It was a personal letter from my lawyer to Gordon's. It was a cease and desist, and a formal severance of all family ties. I placed it on the table in front of Gordon's empty chair. "I am done," I said to the room. I walked out of the boardroom. I walked past the receptionist who had once looked at me with pity. I walked past the portraits of the company founders on the wall. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the building and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air outside was cold, but it felt different. It felt clean. The noise of the city traffic sounded like music. I took a deep breath. filling my lungs with oxygen that didn't belong to anyone else. I checked my phone. I had a text from Miles. Miles. Is it done? I typed back. Quinn. It is done. The trust is restored. The company is safe. And I am free. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the building one last time. I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a vengeful daughter. I saw Quinn Howard. Just Quinn. I turned and walked toward my car. I didn't look back at the tower. I had a company to run. I had a life to live. And for the first time in 34 years, I wasn't carrying any baggage. I had won. Not because they lost, but because I finally knew exactly what I was worth. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. And don't forget to subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.